Tonight on Tower Talks, New York City Mayor Eric Adams is indicted on federal charges related to corruption, a closer look at the historic case and the direction it's headed. Israel and Lebanon fighting continues to grow, and the U.S. shows its support for Israel. In the year of AI at UT Austin, an expert panel discusses the impact of artificial intelligence. All of this coming up on Tower Talks. Good evening and welcome to Tower Talks, the show where we take a closer look at the stories affecting Texans, Austinites, and students right here at UT Austin. I'm Trent Lamm, and tonight we have an expert panel lined up for you to talk about artificial intelligence. But before we get into that, a lot is going on around the world and in politics. New York City Mayor Eric Adams pleaded not guilty on Friday, September 27th to a 5-count indictment brought by federal prosecutors in Manhattan, according to the New York Times. Adams is charged with bribery, the solicitation of campaign contributions from foreign citizens, wire fraud, and conspiracy to accept bribes, many of which relate to Adams's and his campaign's relationship with the Turkish government. Federal prosecutors also revealed in court that additional charges will likely be filed against Adams and that more defendants are likely to be charged. The indictment comes after multiple high-ranking city officials resigned from their post amid the investigations, including the New York City Schools Chancellor, the police commissioner, and Adams' chief counsel. Adams was a police captain in the NYPD before running for mayor, and he's the first New York City mayor to face criminal charges while in office. Adams is up for re-election in 2025, though some have called for the mayor to resign. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has the ability to remove Adams from office, but has not shown any plans to do so. The developments come as arrests on corruption charges have been made against 2 former New York City Fire Department chiefs. Tower Talks will continue to follow this story. And in the past few weeks, the conflict between Israel and the political party Hezbollah has escalated. The recent tensions began in mid-September after attacks by Israel on Hezbollah. Intercepted pagers and walkie-talkies delivered to the political party exploded simultaneously on September 17th and 18th. The explosions killed over 40 people and injured over 3,000. The explosions took place predominantly in Lebanon, but some explosions were reported in neighboring Syria. While the Israeli government never claimed responsibility, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated the same day that Hezbollah would, quote, understand the message, end quote. Within the week, Hezbollah launched a rocket attack on Israel, injuring several, before Israel launched another round of missile attacks. In the weeks following, Israel announced it had assassinated top Hezbollah leadership and recently launched a ground invasion into the country of Lebanon. With the political party being backed by Iran, tensions in the Middle East have heightened. President Joe Biden spoke today with Netanyahu for the first time since late August. The Biden administration has also changed from calling for a ceasefire and is now supporting Israel's ground offensive. Tower Talks will continue to bring you updates. And coming up, an expert panel discusses the state of artificial intelligence in the year of AI. Stay tuned.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue?
Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. Our expert panel tonight includes the Assistant Professor of Practice in the Department of Computer Science at the College of Natural Science, Dr. Justin W. Hart, Professor and Director of ROBIN, the Robot Interactive Intelligence Lab, Dr. Roberto Martin. Finally, Professor and Director of the Artificial Intelligence Lab, Dr. Raymond Mooney. Welcome, and thank you all for coming on. So first, our President Jay Hartzell announced in January that 2024 will be the year of AI for the University of Texas at Austin. The announcement came with a slew of AI-related expansions, including the creation of an inaugural online master's degree in AI in order to continue making breakthroughs in research. Each of the panelists here have some form of expertise within AI. So to start us off, can each of you talk about your area of expertise and your involvement with the year of AI? And I think we'll go and start down here with you, Dr. Hart.
Yeah, so my name's Justin Hart, and I run a laboratory called the Living with Robots Lab. I work a lot on artificial intelligence and human-robot interaction, especially what might be called social or naturalistic human-robot interactions, so robots that respond to things like people's body language, gaze, point gestures. But I have other work. I work a lot on what would be called domestic service robots, so robots that you would put into your home to help you do day-to-day tasks. I co-direct a program called Living Working with Robots, which actually Roberto is part of, and we have these ideas of having fielded robots out here at UT Austin and studies in that fielded environment. And then I work a lot on the technologies to support those things, so like semantic mapping and computer vision applications, but really specifically as applied to robotics. Oh, and I also recently hosted a symposium on trustworthy autonomous systems, so the idea of building autonomous systems that in some sense are trustworthy, like you would field it, but you would also feel good about the fact that you fielded it. Like if you have an autonomous vehicle, like what makes it such that you feel good about that being on the public roadway? If you have something that's taking care of your parents, you know, what makes you feel okay that that robot is taking care of a human being, right? That sort of thing.
Okay, so my main research these days is in what's called natural language processing, which I think everybody is now familiar with thanks to large language models like ChatGPT, which is getting computers to communicate with people in ordinary human languages like English. In particular, I focus on what I refer to as grounded natural language processing. So a lot of natural language processing just deals with text and with language alone. What I really believe, in order to understand language, you have to understand the connection between language and perception and action in the world. And one of the areas I've worked on with both Justin and Roberto is language and robotics. So how can we talk to a robot in natural language, get it to understand what we want the robot to do and have it do that? In particular, more dialogue. A lot of times you just tell the robot what to do and it does it. I'm really interested in how you can engage a robot in a back and forth dialogue where you make sure that the robot understands exactly what you want. And so I really care about language in a context in which you're actually grounded in a situation and you're trying to get something done rather than just chit-chatting about something like you do with ChatGPT. Another area that I work a fair bit in is what I usually call language and code, which is, you know, everybody knows that programming a computer is really hard, which is why we educate tons of students here. It takes them 4 years to get a basic degree so that they're competent at programming computers. It would be nice if you could just ask a computer in human English language what you want it to do, and it could write its own code for doing that. And so this area has really blossomed in the last several years as well. And I'm very interested in how we can build better ways of allowing ordinary users to program computers by just telling them what they want in English or in natural language rather than having to learn some arcane, complex programming language. So I think I'll leave it at that.
So then, Dr. Martin?
Yeah. So I research in robotics, and especially in the connection robotics, AI, literally called more like robot learning, which connects to machine learning. How can robots experience the world and learn from those experiences or from demonstrations from experts on how to perform tasks? How can they become better on performing those tasks by just practicing? And yeah, how can they also perform manipulation tasks? Basically are the tasks that you want a robot to do for you, want to clean your house. In terms of the domain that I apply those techniques on, I work on what is called mobile manipulation, which is a combination of autonomous driving around and stationary manipulation, how robots are in front of a table and figure out what to do. So combining robots that can navigate around your house and then change things, change the state of the world, cleaning, cooking. I also work a lot of tasks in the household domain. They are very interesting because they are very practical. Everyone wants these tasks to be automated, but they are also very interesting scientifically. I research in computer vision. How can robots understand what they see and use that information? And for that, the domain of household tasks is very rich on very different objects, very different tasks, and also on the natural language component of it. How can robots actually talk to humans, communicate with humans, understand what humans want, and try to collaborate even with them? That is something that I'm working on with Ray.
Thank you so much. I have another question for the panel. Artificial intelligence as a whole is just such a broad topic, and a lot of the general public doesn't really have a strong understanding of it. And I just want to ask, like, how would you define artificial intelligence? And what would you say is the general public's understanding of this field of science? I guess we can go and start with you, Dr. Martin.
Right. That is a really, really hard question because
it's a modifier on another word that I don't know how to define, which is intelligence. And I think there have been kind of like hundreds, if not thousands of years of trying to figure out what intelligence means. The closer that they get is an agent is intelligent if it expresses a behavior that we would say is quite optimal. It does the best thing that it can do. So artificial intelligence is just a set of techniques that for different things, for talking, for manipulating, for navigating, create agents that do what is the most optimal thing to do in each condition. So I think that would be the most general version of a definition that I can find of from the side of trying to define it, from the side of what are the materials, what are the topics that come into that. So machine learning is a big part of AI. Computer vision, how make use of images generated by a camera, by a sensor, is also a big part of it. And natural language is also a big part of it. Robotics as well, how to take these actions into the physical world. So it combines a lot of different fields into one big umbrella of how to make intelligent decisions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, certainly, obviously, I agree with everything Roberto said. One of the definitions I've always liked of AI is getting computers to do what they can't do yet. And getting computers to do things that humans do better than computers do. That's always been one of the key things. And there's a lot of problems still that I think people do better than computers. But of course, in the last few years, like natural language, like I said, is the area. The progress in the field in the last few years, I think everybody's been astounded as well as myself, and I've worked in the area for 40 years now, is the progress we've made in the past few years in terms of having a computer that you can just talk to in English and have a conversation and can compose documents has been amazing, and that is one of the things that I've focused on. But there's always challenges and things that aren't done well yet, and I think that's what drives the research in the field is still striving to get computers to do things still that people can't do. Robotics is a great area. What is it? What's the roboticists at CMU? They call it what's law, where it's like getting a computer to do what a professor does is easy. Getting the computer to do what a 3-year-old does. Oh gosh. Moravec's paradox, it's called, where building a robot plumber is probably a lot harder than building a robot lawyer. And because just all that physical manipulation uses a lot of intelligence that you just take for granted. But really, we still don't have it'll be a while before we have a competent robot plumber that could just come into your house and repair your toilet or something. I think you're going to hire a robot lawyer before you hire a robot plumber.
Yeah, computers can play chess very well, but they cannot move the pieces in a very good way. We are better at moving the pieces than playing chess.
And another piece of that is that large language models have made it a lot easier to scan and retrieve information. Like, you can have documents that are basically not designed for any type of machine to process in a meaningful way, and you can extract meaningful facts from those. And so, like, something like where you're doing information retrieval, like a lawyer would do, or a paralegal. Like, there have been cases of people misusing ChatGPT for that because ChatGPT wasn't designed for that. But you could easily conceptualize a large language model that is designed for that type of information retrieval.
Well, there was one lawyer that got caught actually submitting the output of ChatGPT as one of his briefs or something, and then he was actually caught on it. I don't know what's happened to that guy.
Just when a large language model essentially makes up facts.
Yeah, because they found it because it made up some things that just were, it referenced some law that didn't even exist. And the guy wasn't even responsible enough to check what the output of the system was and make sure that it actually made sense. I mean, that's what just mentioned. This most people have heard this term hallucination, where these models will just make up stuff that is not true and is not valid because it's using a statistical model of the language, and sometimes, most of the times, that model predicts things that are actually true and are good facts about the world. But every once in a while, its statistical model will just generate BS that isn't true at all, and so you have to be very confident BS and very convincing too. Sometimes I say it generates beautiful BS. That's what a language model does. But you have to be very careful. 99% of the time, it's very good, but you have to worry about that 1% of the time where it hallucinates and makes up facts and generates things that are just not true.
Just back to that original question, though, I agree with what both of them said, but I would also say that the easiest way to understand the field of artificial intelligence is through the lens of the evolution and history of the field. It started when we were just having working computers, or maybe you could say 1969, the Dartmouth Conference, this was at a point where 58, 58, oh gosh, I better update my class notes. But the thing about that is that people were experiencing rapid progress in computation, like light speed progress, right? And then they thought that computers are going to be able to do everything. And so people were like, well, can we build an intelligent agent that does all this stuff? But they were struggling to identify what is intelligence. They were struggling to identify, what sorts of problems they wanted to solve. And what happened is the field broadened and broadened and broadened, and then each of these areas got sliced off into its own area, like machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision. And so people, sort of hyper-specialized. All those things are artificial intelligence, And then people sort of say, like Ray said, AI is what computers can't do yet. And then the challenge is that AI accomplishes something. It's no longer AI. It's commonly accepted that a computer can do this thing.
But I think if you take a historical perspective, then you have to talk about the AI winters, because I think we are now talking about AI for things that maybe we didn't talk about AI before. We didn't call them AI because it was almost bad to call them AI, and there were overpromise on AI several times in history, starting with that, with what started at that conference. There were overpromise, and then suddenly the expectations were not met. So then both the public and the funding sources and everyone was kind of like, okay, AI is not working. So if you use the word AI, it was bad seen after that, and that created a winter where even doing research in AI was very, very difficult. So then kind of like a winter pass, another wave. I think there have been kind of like two waves of AI, 2 winters of AI. And now we are again in a moment where talking about AI is trendy, but I would say 10 years ago, you would be doing the same things and you probably wouldn't call it AI, I would say. So yeah, I don't know. The term itself has been kind of like being on...
Popularity has varied a lot.
Yes, it's kind of like being popular and unpopular kind of in several waves in the last 60 years or 80 years almost, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. That's a perfect segue as we're going to talk about the state of AI right now and also how it was in the past. And for Dr. Mooney specifically, your research is targeted at natural language processing and machine learning. And could you briefly explain how computers understand human language?
Yeah, so one thing that so large language models, which are the standard technology that are being used, they're actually trained to do a very simple task, which is predict the next word, which is I read a sequence of text, and I want to just know what the next word's going to be. That's actually surprisingly useful and requires a lot of understanding of the language to accurately predict the next word. Some cases are not that difficult, but other ones it really is. And so these models are basically neural nets, which are machine learning models that try to mimic the learning property of human neural systems originally, and that work started back in the 50s when this first meeting started, the first algorithms or computer systems for modeling how neurons learn. And then that has gone through 3 waves. There was a lot of progress in the 80s, and then recently in so-called deep learning, there's been progress, which of course Jeff Hinton just won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He was one of the real developers of neural net technology, both in the 80s when it was so-called backpropagation was developed, and more recently when deep learning was presented. So I just announced yesterday or the day before that he was one of the co-winners of the Nobel Prize in Physics, which physics seems a little bit of an odd discipline to award for neural net development. But you just train one of these networks that are trying to model a neural network, a human neural system, to predict the next word. And so when you type a question to ChatGPT, it just says, okay, what would naturally follow? What would be the text that would statistically be highly probable to occur after the text? So if you asked a question, well, what's the text that's most likely to occur after that? An answer to the question. So it's really trained to do a very simple task. It's called autoregressive, which is a technical term, which just means take everything you've seen up to this point and predict the next thing, in that case, the next word in the sentence. And that, it turns out to be surprisingly useful. But it has its limitations, which is why it can hallucinate. Because sometimes it's statistically what would likely follow this might not actually be something that's true.
I'm curious, you also talked about how you've been in this field for a while. How has research in the field shifted in the past few years, and have you also seen just like a major growth in this field?
Absolutely. I mean, it's been dramatic. So I actually gave a talk in our department about a year and a half ago called The New Era of Big Science AI, How do Academics Adapt to the New Reality? Because things have changed dramatically. Because it used to be, academics doing AI research would have a little project with one of their graduate students, and they do a little program that does some little task, and they publish a paper on it. We weren't competing with multi-billion-dollar companies that are spending millions and millions of dollars in, training these algorithms on just all the text. Why are language models so good? Because they're trained on basically every bit of language that a human has typed into a computer at this point is being used to train these algorithms, which is why, like, the New York Times is suing OpenAI because they say, you're using all our content and you're not reimbursing us anything for it. So it's just trained on all this amazing amount of data using an amazing amount of compute power, which of course also has a huge energy impact and carbon footprint, which a lot of people worry about. By doing that, the technology has made amazing leaps in the last few years, and it's less academics. Most now academic papers, I wanted to look at like the average number of authors on an academic paper in AI. It's gone up dramatically. Like I said, it used to be 2, a PhD advisor and their PhD student. And now it's these teams, literally there are papers that come out of like Google or OpenAI, which literally have a whole appendix of the 100 authors that are on that paper, with a little note on how they each contributed to the project. So we've gone from this little, sort of science in a lab to this huge, multi-billion-dollar corporate industry behind it, and it's really changed the field very dramatically. I think more academics now, rather than trying to compete with the companies, they're working on trying to figure out what are the limitations of what are the hallucinations that these algorithms come up with? What are maybe some new approaches to training neural nets that would help avoid some of that hallucination? So there's still interesting research problems out there, but the field has definitely dramatically changed amazingly in the last few years, thanks to this big science-ification and corporate-ification of AI research.
I mean, it's actually worth noting that Roberto and I, our first paper together was set up by Google. Like we both contributed to a social navigation paper together. Might be our only publication together so far, but we'll fix that.
Thank you very much. And moving on to you, Dr. Hart, you are involved in the Learning Agents Research Group. Can you speak more on the function of this group as a whole?
So I should probably update my website. So I started at UT Austin as a postdoctoral fellow, co-supervised by Ray and Peter Stone. Peter's laboratory is the Learning Agents Research Group. LARG focuses a lot on reinforcement learning and robotics. I have my laboratory, the Living with Robots laboratory. We focus a lot on human interactive robot systems. And so some of the problems we look at, the one I was just talking about that Roberto and I are on a paper together is social navigation. Social navigation is, there is a lot of work on robots navigating in open terrain, right? There's a lot of robots that can navigate through a hallway, and pretty reliably you can just download a package from the internet, put it onto your robot. It's probably implemented in robot operating system. Your robot probably already has drivers that are implemented in robot operating system. You turn on all the drivers, you do a little bit of configuration, the robot will drive around the building with no problem. You introduce people into the scene and suddenly things become much more difficult, right? Because people are walking around, they're moving around the scene. There are techniques that are used to make robots kind of navigate through crowds. So if you've been to like a restaurant, you've been down at Kura Sushi or one of those places, and they have these waiter robots, and what do? They play music so that you know to get out of their way. They'll stop the second they come up to you. They have relatively fast control loops which detect you relatively quickly, so they will stop. But what they're not doing is sort of weaving through a crowd of people in real time. They're not reacting to the people beyond stopping when they get too close. So that's one problem that I work on. Other stuff is I have a lot of robots where we're looking at putting them into the home and making them flexible enough to work with people in these sort of very open domains. If you look at the history of robotics, the original robots, the ones that have been around for a long time, work in places like factories. And if you look at what they do, they're put inside a cage and they're kept away from people so that the robot can't do something like squish a person like a bug, right? Or so a person can't go in and move a part slightly and now the painting robot isn't painting the line on straight, right? Those two things are important. So how do you cope with that? You need to make the robot able to more flexibly work in an environment that isn't designed around robots, is designed around people. So in my laboratory, we say that we work on two problems. One is building robots that work in environments which are designed for people. And the other one is building robots which work well with people, understanding the communication that they make. And I still do a lot of natural language processing stuff. The robot that people have seen the most out of my lab in the past year is a robot named Dobby. Dobby uses a large language model, and it uses it both for sort of high-level reasoning and task planning, and it uses it also for dialogue generation. So you can go to a large language model, and presuming it didn't hallucinate, you could say "Oops, I spilled my drink. What are you going to do to help me?" And it'll be like, "Oh, well," and this actually is the problem in the original Google paper on this is I'm going to go find a mop or a towel. I'm going to go wipe up the surface. And then there are parts that I can't do. I'm going to ask you to do those things, right? So what I had is I had my students implement that, but we implemented a much larger architecture in terms of how does the robot update its knowledge of the world? How does it update the state? How does it update what is going into the large language model? So you could place a request to the robot. You could say, oh gosh, I'm in the Living with Robots laboratory. What should I see? And the robot can start listing off things like, oh, you could see the other building-wide intelligence BWI bots, the project I do in conjunction with Peter Stone. You could say, I want to look at the RoboCup at Home robots, but the robot can start driving up to those things while it's doing it and have dialogue with you, and you can say, you know what, I'm not that interested in this particular robot, I want to go see something else. That's a thing that our model can do that others can't. And a lot of that has to do with how we treat the semantics of what's going on in the scene, how we process those data. So, we work a lot on these problems of how do we really get robots into the home rather than sort of build a toy version of this that we can't. Other things to do is stuff like scene understanding. If you're navigating around and it's looking in a new area and it says, maybe you're asking the robot for directions. Well, our robot can drive around the building and read all the signage and say, oh yeah, this office is over here, and then record it in its map and then remember to bring you back to that place.
You talk a little about robots becoming a part of the service industry or with driving. Have you, when around did you see this becoming more mainstream with robots in the fields of service industry?
Yeah, I mean, I have some real ideas about this because I also run the world competition on domestic service robots. And I would say that the thing that drives the industry right now, there is always demand, right? There are people who come up to me and I have an idea for a robot. It replaces a person who does a job, and then you make more money because that person doesn't have to be paid, right? But there's a big challenge there, which is also probably the technology to build that robot doesn't exist, right? So what drives things? We have technologies now that work fairly well for certain things on robot systems. And what we do, or what people do when they're building these robot companies, is they say, I have a this, I have a that. If I stick those two things together, I can do this task. And so what's driving sort of the robot industry now in terms of these startups is that they have enough pieces that they can fit together where if they do a little bit of creative engineering, they can build a system that solves a problem. And we've only recently really gotten to the point where we have packages and materials that are mature enough to allow that to happen.
Very much. And Dr. Martin, you've also worked with robotics. Have you also seen this happen pretty recently with robotics becoming a lot more mainstream in the world, especially I know AI right now has become kind of a buzzword.
Navigating robots, yes. So I think navigation is becoming kind of something that we are doing in a good way. So service robots that bring your food to your table they already exist. You can go here in Austin to some restaurants that have that. The part where the robot itself takes the plate and puts it on your table, I think that there's where we are a little bit stuck, that part of the manipulation. There are still challenges in the social navigation component in how to do navigation in a good way in the environment, and that's what Justin was mentioning that we have been looking at, and we even have some publications together. But I think the biggest challenge right now, and when robots and humans are at very, very different levels of capability, is when the robots have to touch the world and change the world, not just navigating around it and trying to not touch it and not do anything harmful, but actually changing it. That is very dangerous. That is where robots break, where the environment breaks, where things can be a little bit kind of like difficult. And yeah, there is where we are a little bit stuck right now. There is a lot of momentum in robotics. There is a lot of new hardwares. But if you go to the practical things, what is the robot that is in your home? Is a Roomba. The only thing that the Roomba does is navigate and touch the wall to know, oh, there is a wall, let me rotate and navigate in another direction. So there is no arms going around, there is no hands touching things, there is not yet. I think we're doing progress in that direction, but I think we're still not there. And yeah, there have been some recent things going on in the field, especially, for example, taking ideas from natural language processing. So, okay, what happens if instead of predicting what is the next word, we try to predict what is the next action to take with my hand? If I've seen enough data of what do I need to do with my hand, how do I need to move my hand to do a task like cooking a meal, maybe I'm able to predict what is the action that I need to take next to prepare a meal. So trying to translate those successes, from example, from natural language processing into robotics is an avenue that people are being exploring more and more lately. And I think it's very exciting. I don't know if it's going to be possible to take that inspiration. There are some issues in there in terms of the morphology, in terms of where do we get that data. For language, you go into internet, you have as much text as you want, and every day it's generated even more text. Where did you get demonstrations of how a robot should move? What should be the next action of a robot to perform a task? You need to ask people to teleoperate a robot. That is very costly. Companies are throwing money in there, having teleoperators operating their robots so that they can generate the data. But it's still not enough data. We need more data. So I don't know if that avenue is going to be possible or not, but it's definitely something to explore. Another avenue that has been explored is simulation. Simulation is becoming better and better. Simulation you can think of is like a video game for robots to go there, try things in a safe environment, and see what happens until they find a good solution. Once that they find a good solution, they go into the real world and do that. So because simulators have become so good that they look even like the real world, then when they see images of the real world, they know what they did in the simulator and they can try to do the same thing. And they can train in simulation very fast, very safely, and try to do things in the real world. That is another avenue that has been pushed a lot in the last years in robot learning.
Thank you very much. And coming up, we'll be talking about the ethics of AI. So stay tuned for Tower Talks.
"13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth."
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue?
Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good morning, Longhorns. Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. A long-standing topic of discussion around AI has been ethical issues surrounding it, whether this be job loss, environmental impact, or data privacy. It has become more common for students to use language processing AI to help in examinations for assignments. And I have a specific question for Dr. Mooney. You talked about how you had done a presentation for instructors about this reality of AI. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
You mean particularly in terms of instructions and
Yes.
students using AI programs?
Like how instructors...
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe we need to change our assignments more so that they're ones that really test people's understanding in a deeper way, that they can't just go to a language model and output something. I've heard that some people now are going back to just having one-on-one interviews with students rather than giving an exam or say write an essay about this. They actually have them come into the office and actually grill them for 20 minutes, asking them back and forth questions where they can't use their smartphone, right? So I think it is changing the way teaching is happening, and maybe we do need, as instructors, need to change our methods for interacting with students and evaluating them. But I think in some sense that could be a good thing. That are these methods we've been using in terms of having people solve problems or write programs or write essays, is that really the best way to test them? I think the thing is, that one-on-one interview approach doesn't scale very well, right? You can give it a test to a whole classroom of 100 students. It's hard to have each of 100 students come in and interview them. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have changed your classes at all, but it is definitely changing things. I think, maybe even more in liberal arts, and people who have teachers who have the students write essays. They do have these things where people are now just returning, ChatGPT output or something. And I think people are learning to adapt to that, but it definitely, will require some changes to the way we do education, I think.
That was a perfect question for the whole panel. I was curious if you've had to change any coursework or the structure of your classroom because of AI, or if you know anyone within the university who has?
I mean, I have some thoughts on it. The way that I've taught the same class for about 7 years, and it's a two-class sequence. One is learn how to program robots, learn how to use basic AI technologies and basic robot technologies, and it's very lecture-driven. But the other half is let's work on writing a research paper together as undergraduate and postgraduate. And actually, Roberto has a similar class. And in the first class, yeah, I don't want students using a code generation model, like a large language model, to generate their programs for them. In the second class, I really don't care if they do that. And I actually have to say, this class is not like your other classes. In your other classes, you're told to reproduce what the professor told you in class in order to pass your homework assignment. In this one, I want you to run a robot study. And if you can, start your programming by having, a large language model dump something for you, you should. And honestly, some of that stuff might be stuff that's beyond their level of instruction so far. A lot of students are intimidated by writing a program in the Unity game engine or a graphical user interface, because they haven't learned that yet. They've been processing text files, or they've been doing whatever, right? And then I can say, oh, well, generate a short program that opens up a window in GTK+, and it'll do it. And then they have the code, and then they can read through it and kind of understand how to do it. And I think that that's great. And honestly, I think that, we could probably be leveraging large language models really well to do stuff like generate problem sets on the fly and customize the content to the different students a little bit, or provide feedback. They aren't as reliable as we would like yet for those types of deployments, but I bet you a lot of people are going to start working on research where it's the LLM is generating problem sets for a robot tutor that's put in someone's home. It's a totally reasonable scenario, and I think that it's a real benefit of large language models.
Yeah. For my class, there is a big component of hands-on exercises. that, I think, like Ray was saying, I think we're somewhat lucky in robotics. There is a lot of these cases where you actually need to do things with robots, and yeah, ChatGPT, I mean, it can help you in some sense on if you have questions, but it's not going to replace you on doing the exercise, because you need to go into the physical world, and ChatGPT is just a bot. So yeah, the components of having essays or some other more like written aspects of it, then yeah, these I think have been more affected. But my class has mainly components of building a robot, controlling a robot. They have to work with the physical device, and they are going to be asked about the physical device. And we actually go in a mix kind of like setting where we actually also talk to them directly after they kind of like give us some written answers about their physical device to know how well they have done. But that is more to check if everyone is kind of like getting the concepts. Not that I'm fearing that ChatGPT is going to be able to solve that. So yeah, in that sense, I'm lucky I'm not affected, because I have the physical world where they actually have to do the exercises. There is no way around that.
Thank you very much. And I had a specific question for Dr. Hart. We talked a little bit earlier about service robots and how a lot of companies are wanting it now. What is your opinion on like the most effective ethical oversight that should be maintained when these companies are wanting robots into their field of work?
I feel like that's a really thorny thing. There's a lot of angles on this. First, people are concerned about job loss, right? But I think that people regard me as a techno-optimist and maybe naive in my view, but I remember when people were concerned about the internet replacing a lot of jobs, and things got better. And there are jobs actually that I think shouldn't exist. If you're continually exposed to toxic chemicals or things that are going to harm your body, I've done things in conjunction with, manufacturing operations and things like this, where, they thought that automating part of a job and getting the person down to where they're doing like some restrictive motion would be really good, because then they weren't picking up a heavy load or something like that. And then they got repetitive strain injury from like making like the same 2 inches to push in a windshield or something like that for their entire career. I think that other ethical issues that have been like really at the forefront of late is like so-called guardrails on large language models, right? When you first had like access to the OpenAI models, you could type in something like, I don't know what I want to say on TV, but picture like, build me a bomb, and it would be like, here's how you do it, right? And like, the guardrails will both check the input to say, was this an appropriate thing to ask? And the output say, was this an appropriate response, right? That is a practical, right now, ethical thing that we have partial solutions to. The guardrails still use machine learning. There are ways to get around it, but that's an important thing.
Which model got trained on that? Would that information not be available on internet anyways? Can't you just Google it?
I mean, it's fair. It's absolutely fair. But like that's a fair point. So exactly what you're saying, Roberto. Like it's already available. It got trained on this model.
The same you can ask for Google, then Google has to filter your searches. I don't know if they do. They do in some extent, but how much do they do, and how much do you claim for Google if you ask how do I build a bomb at home, and then you build a bomb? Is Google's fault? So I don't think you would say it's Google's fault, but we say it's the LLM's fault. Is the language model fault? I'm not sure. I don't know about that. I'm debating just for the sake of taking the older, but I'm not sure.
This is probably more a question of like that the legal liability for that is a little untested, whereas like the search capability that people feel that the legal liability is clearly on the person who provided the initial content, right? And if they arrest someone, they're going to arrest that person, right? Whereas like if OpenAI generates you something that got used in a violent way, and you couldn't find that content, maybe it did synthesize 2 ideas together, right? That would be a dangerous tool. But there's another content generation issue, which is the generation of like unsavory images using an image generation model, right? And that's something that's also kind of been like companies have been back and forth on how to deal with that, right? But like if you said generate me an image of a celebrity doing something illegal, it's going to be like, I'm not going to do that. Even if you just say use the image of a celebrity, it's going to say I'm not going to do that. So there is, I do think that there's a lot of issues there. I didn't mean to cut you off there, because I agree that maybe if a large language model generates something, it's probably the responsibility of the person with what they do with that, right, as opposed to the company for providing the information to do it, right?
There's another thing that I maybe disagree a little bit with you, Justin. I mean, you made a good case for jobs that you say they shouldn't exist, and you put very good examples of, okay, yeah, I don't know, picking up nuclear waste or something like that. These are easy examples, but I think the thorny cases is if we get into robots that can do, let's say, easy or kind of like accessible manipulation tasks like that. Maybe you like being a gardener. You have been a gardener your entire life, and suddenly no one wants you as a gardener because there is a robot that does it for less money. Or you love making shoes, or you love, I think for these cases where the job is really like something that a human should not do, it's a clear case. I think the difficult ethical part is what happens if robots can take jobs that actually some people want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, yeah, I mean, they are not going to be able to do it. So, but I wouldn't say those jobs, just because a robot can do it, they should not exist. I think that's a bit too general, and I think there are some jobs that should not exist. There are some jobs that, I mean, if people love them, why not? And that's going to be the ethical question, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to prevent us from moving on, but I can think of readily as some examples of that, right? Like generative art, right? Like people really have a gut reaction that people should be writing music, poetry, and drawing things, right? And now you have, some sort of transformer that can do all those things, or some sort of diffusion model that can do all those things. And so people take that really personally. Of course, right now you can also readily identify the AI generated art versus something that a person did, but it's very likely it will get better at that, right? And I would say that I've used a lot of AI generated art for various purposes. I couldn't afford to hire someone to do that, right? And so there is some of that. And then on the manipulation front, we're really testing that boundary right now, because there are companies that have things like hamburger flipping robots and frying robots. And I would say that for it's true that the general manipulation problem is still way too hard, right? Like the reach down and place the plate down on the table, that's way too hard. The scoop, the flipper under the burgers on the grill, they, can pretty much be done. It can pretty much be done with almost off-the-shelf hardware. And then is the burger the right level of brown now? That can pretty much be done, with an off-the-shelf model. And so, I feel like that's a real testing ground right now, is all those people disappearing, and then all those operations consolidating into things like ghost kitchens, which, don't even need that technology in order to test how do you get rid of that piece of the workforce.
Recommendations here is we should all work less, if we have more robots doing things. And, I think it was Keynes made a prediction in the 30s, that people would be by now he thought people would be working maybe 10 hours a week or something like that. But the work week hasn't shortened in 50, 60 years or whatever. And, I think maybe, we do, and if people still want to garden, they, but the question is do they do it as a hobby, or do they expect to get paid? I mean, if you enjoy doing something, you should use your hobby time to do that, but not necessarily expect.
To do it as a hobby and get paid.
Well, that maybe will not be possible. But yet, if we're all working less and where everyone is more productive, I mean, I think another thing that all of us are interested in is having humans and robots, or humans and computers, collaborate on things. Yeah. Where there's still a lot of aspects of jobs, the more maybe creative, the more outside the box, there are things that current AI systems can't do well. But let's have humans and computers work together. But that still means then we're going to need less people doing that job, because we're going to make every person who's doing it much more productive. And then I would just say let's all work less and have more leisure time.
Everyone will work less, except roboticists that will have to work more. So I don't know if that
but we enjoy it, so it's okay.
Well, thank you very much. And coming up, we'll go and just discuss the future of AI, and we'll be right back on Tower Talks.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue?
Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. As we come to a close on our episode, I wanted to ask a question for the entire panel. We've talked a lot this episode about just the advancement and also the state of AI currently and also robotics in general. And I just want to know for everyone, how do you see AI impacting just the world in the future, either AI or robotics? Yeah, whoever wants to jump in.
Roberto looks ready. I'm not. I mean, I have an internal debate. My optimistic side is saying, there is so much opportunity. There are so much good things that could happen. There is so much bad jobs that could be taken by machines, and that people can focus on really kind of exciting things, on doing things that are not so tedious, not so dangerous. That's great. On the other side, with every technology, there is the dark side of it. If I have a knife, I can cut you a meal, or I can do something bad. So yeah, that is the problem. It's not about the technology being good or bad. It's about people having very creative ways of using technology always. And AI, we don't even know the limits. So that is the dangerous part, because we don't know the limits in the good side. We also don't know exactly the limits on the bad side, and we have seen already misuses of AI that are not very helpful for society. So false information, some things that are really that is not helping us as a society. But I'm an optimistic person at the core, so I really think that it's going to increase the quality of life for our society and for most people. So I want to think that, and I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, so I totally agree with Rupert. Any technology throughout history can either be used for good or evil purposes, and AI is a very powerful technology, and I think it has a lot of amazing potential applications. One thing I don't think we talked about was, I think it was even announced today that the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to this group out of Deep Mind that learned a program that knows how to fold proteins. And that's could revolutionize drug design, right? And have amazing impact on healthcare, on the positive side, But also people have talked about how you could use these AI programs to design a new pathogen, the next COVID-19, that could be a pandemic that could spread around the world. So what do we need to do to prevent the bad uses of this technology and promote the good uses? And I think a lot of that is having good legislation. So one thing we have a faculty lunch in the computer science department on Wednesday. One thing we were talking about, there was this recent law that was proposed in California that actually the governor just recently vetoed, even though it passed the legislature in California with a pretty good margin, about how to control these large language models. And it was something about, if you have a language model that you spend so much money investing in that, then if it has a bad impact, then you can be sued for it. And I haven't read the details of this legislation. But even within the AI community, there were AI scientists that were were for this legislation, Jeff Hinton and I think Yoshua Bengio, and then there were AI scientists like Fei-Fei Li and Jan LeCun who were on the other side, so even AI people. But I think it's a step forward where we are finally talking about what would be intelligent legislation, and even the federal government's talking about this too, that would help control the technology. And I think there's lots of room for that, but I think that we do have to have a deeper discussion to figure out what is the right way to not harm the potential benefits of this technology while still constraining its definite risk of serious negative impact as well. And I think we have to talk about that as a community as a whole using the democratic process.
Well, I agree on these ethical impacts. I've been spending the past few years thinking about that because I got involved in UT Good Systems, as several scientists here have. But I would say that when I think about the future impact of AI and robotics, I think that you have to think in terms of like timescales, right? Like when you're planning out what you're going to do with your laboratory, I think you think 6 months to a year for a paper, 4 years for a doctoral thesis. How long are you going to have like a grant program open, and what can I accomplish in that time? And you can never predict something that's going to be like huge, like large language models coming from like being like kind of useful to remarkably useful, right? But I think that in general, we're going to see a lot more things automated. We're going to see a lot more good AI. We're also going to find the limitations of almost every technology pretty quickly as people start to try to adopt and commercialize this. Like we already see, sort of the limits of what an LLM can do. We already sort of see the limits of what image generation can do. Roberto was talking about the limits of like, can you get enough data into this thing to train a robot to do a skill, right? And these things are, they're very real, very impactful limits. I think that we're going to overcome all these in time. The question is like, how long is that time, right? And hopefully it's quick, because actually I think that the net of all this is going to be a substantial benefit to society.
Well, thank you so much, all of y'all, for coming out tonight and really helping us explore AI and robotics in general, and just kind of giving us a better understanding of the world it is. And tune in next week to hear about climate change and ongoing green initiatives. And be sure to follow us on social media at TSTV News on X, formerly Twitter, and at towertalks TSTV on Instagram. Check us out at tstv.news online and subscribe to our newsletter, Newsroom Notes. From all of us here in the studio, thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel